the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon, and I've been investing in property for over 20 years. And if you're an active landlord or planning your next property investment, this podcast is for you. Last week, I had a conversation with Susanna Cole, where we talked about an example investment property or investment deal that she had purchased. And it was a BRRR style deal. So that's a buy, refurbish, refinance and rent out deal. And it was sort of, well, it had a number of components to it, that actually made it a bit more sort of different or complex versus perhaps a typical buy-to-let investment property. There was a sort of slightly unusual sales scenario, and indeed Susanna had to wait a while before that was the property was actually available after she had put in an offer for it and decided to purchase it. There was also quite a large refurbishment involved, indeed converting the property to an all-ensuite or nearly all-ensuite HMO. And she was also buying with investor money rather than using her own or her own business's funds directly. And then, of course, the remortgaging element of it, which was always part of the plan, and then actually managed to get almost all of the purchase money out of it again, out of that deal, in order to make it work very well from a sort of return on investment point of view, and in order to get out of the very expensive investor finance that had been provided as part of that purchase. Now, I really do recommend that you go back and listen to that episode. I think Susanna shared some fantastic insights and sort of expertise around this kind of deal and this kind of project and how to find them and how to sort of manage them. However, for this week's episode, I thought I'd provide something that was a bit of a contrast to that, and perhaps a more boring investment example or investment property. And it's not a contrast in terms of whether it was successful or not, because the example I've got for you today is very much a successful property investment. However, it is a contrast in terms of the approach and what was actually involved in making the deal work from beginning to, well, the ongoing. There's not an end as such as yet. So I think, or at least I hope, that you will enjoy hearing another example and working through what was involved in it, but also seeing the contrast in potential property investment deals where both are quite successful, but really very, very different. I would like to record more episodes like last week and like this week, where I'm talking through or working through a very real example of a property investment. And that could be a very complex and perhaps exciting investment like last week's, or it could be a much more boring and run-of-the-mill investment like this week's. I think both are really very important, not only to sort of have out there in the world, in the market, but also to record and to share, so that other property investors can really understand what's actually involved most of the time in sort of day-to-day property investing. There's a lot of material out there, training, etc., that talks about the more complex and the more exciting and the infinite return on investment and getting all your money back sort of deals. So, and while those do exist, and it is important to talk about them and share them, I would really like to talk about more, boring deals as well, and how they can still work for people. If you would be interested in sharing such a deal and helping others learn from it, really including very basic, run-of-the-mill, boring deals, they are what I want to talk about. And I would really appreciate talking to you if you'd like to share such a project. If that's the case, you can email me, show@thebusinessofproperty.com. And I would love to have you on as a guest and chat through your boring property deals. So back to the one for today. Now, this example property is one of my investment properties, and this is a property that I found back in 2017. So it was a while ago now. In fact, a lot longer than I'd realised when I was putting these notes together. And it does surprise me that property has actually, or that property purchase took place so long ago. But anyway, so how did I find this property? Well, I was just browsing Rightmove. I don't tend to proactively phone agents in the same way that Susanna talked about doing. I instead look through Rightmove and I do a bit of an early analysis. And I have talked about that, some of that early analysis in past episodes as well. I'll try and include a link or two to those in the show notes for this one so you can find them. And once I've done that early analysis, just to check the property is reasonable from my point of view as a potential investment, only at that point will I then call up the agent and arrange a viewing. And that's exactly what I did for this particular property. So I found it on Rightmove. I did that early analysis. I decided that it was potential as an investment, and I phoned up the agent and arranged a viewing, and then obviously went and had a look at this property. And the property was an existing rental property. So it had existing tenants in place, and it was being sold by the landlord with tenants in situ. I think that narrowed the potential audience for this property quite significantly. And as part of that, or maybe not as part of that, but separate from that, the seller was, I think, relatively motivated. And this was something that I actually learned through the negotiation stage and talking to the agent and things. But those two combined, the fact that the seller was a little motivated and there was a much smaller potential buying market because there were tenants in situ, I think made the negotiation process and the price that this property was ultimately available at work more in my favour. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. What was this property? Well, it's a 3-bed terrace home. It's local to me in Redhill, and I'll take you for a wander through this property. So as you approach the property, it's got a little front garden in front of it, and the front door for the property is kind of central to the property with a sort of window on either side of that front door. As you go through the front door, it opens up into a downstairs hallway with stairs to your right and the sort of main downstairs hallway leading straight ahead. But if you don't go down there just yet, instead you turn to your left. There's a door there that takes you straight through into the lounge of the property. And this lounge extends from the front of the property all the way through to the back of the property. But if we don't go any further into that room, that's the lounge room as it is. If we take a step back and turn back down the corridor straight ahead from the front door, and if we walk down here, just past the stairway and the understairs cupboard, there's a door that goes through into the dining area of this property. And we can follow this dining area round to the right, which is sort of how this room extends out to the right as you enter the room. And if you then go further around and double back on yourself, you then end up looking at the kitchen. So this is a kind of L-shaped room, sort of open plan. There's no further doors involved. And you've got the kitchen at the front of the property with the window opening out onto the front garden. And the dining area, which you entered through, is along the back of the property, with only the lounge being the other part of the back of the property. So that's the ground floor mostly. So if we go back out into the hallway and then back up the stairs, we're now up onto a fairly small landing on the first floor. And we've got 2 bedrooms, one to the left and one to the right, that are both double rooms. And these are the rooms at the front of the house upstairs. And also to the left, as you've come up the stairs, is a bedroom to the back of the property. Now, this is a much, much smaller single bedroom. And it really is sort of just a box bedroom, really. And to the right from this landing space are 2 more rooms. There's a bathroom, which is sort of the original bathroom in this property. And then there's another shower room which I think was originally something else, perhaps just open space at the landing, because the landing is fairly small as it currently is. But now in this this extra shower room has been squeezed in a shower cubicle at one end and a toilet at the other end and a teeny tiny sink in between. So this property has actually got 2 shower stroke bathrooms as it sort of stands, plus the 3 bedrooms, 2 of which are doubles and 1 of which is just a fairly small single. So that's sort of the outline of this property. And when I went to view it originally, there wasn't really anything wrong with the property as such. There wasn't anything major that needed doing, any major single items that needed doing. However, the whole property was looking a bit tired. It hadn't been mistreated. It didn't suffer from having multiple animals living there or anything. In fact, it didn't have any animals living there. Just the standard human occupants. And they weren't, as I said, they weren't mistreating it or anything. It's just that it hadn't been decorated for a while and was looking a bit tired and needed a facelift, really. But there wasn't really anything else very wrong with it. So my plan before purchasing this property was really just to use it as a standard, very simple buy-to-let property. Buy it as it was with the tenants in situ, and to possibly talk to them about doing some works to it while they were still there, or if they didn't want to do that, then really just sort of run it as it was until they were prepared to or ready to depart on their own. I wasn't planning to evict them or anything else. And then at that point, do a refurbishment and get it sort of smartened up and hopefully increase the rent a little bit in order to rent it out again. But even if I didn't increase the rent much, or even perhaps at all, it still wouldn't have been disastrous. So it's a very simple property, very simple plan, and I'll tell you some of the numbers involved. So the purchase price that was agreed was £312,000, and it was on the market for quite a lot more than that. But as I said, with the motivated seller and not very many potential buyers, I think they worked in my favour, and I was able to secure quite a significant discount from the asking price. Now, whether it was sort of a below market value or however you might define that, I think it probably was a little bit, but not very significantly, because it did need work. It did need refurbishing in terms of sort of redecorating and just smartening up. So if someone had bought this as their home, they probably wouldn't have wanted to just move into it. They probably would have wanted to decorate first. So it did need a bit of money spending on it. So I think that was at least some of the discount. Although, as I said, there was a little bit more than that as well. Now, I purchased this with a 65% loan-to-value mortgage. Now, that was lower than I would typically want to purchase a property with. I would normally aim for 75% if I could. But on this particular occasion, decided to go with 65% because I did have the savings available, and it meant a lower interest rate on that mortgage. So it worked out better overall. So the base rate back in 2017 was 0.25%, and the mortgage rate that I initially got when buying this, I think, was about 1.8%. So it's crazy low compared to what we're looking at these days, but there we go. And in terms of the actual purchase process, it all went really very smoothly, even with the tenants in situ. There weren't any complications with that. They had a tenancy agreement. It all looked correct. It was relatively recent, so there was nothing wrong there. In fact, the tenancy had been handled by an agent, so it was all correct. There was nothing odd or wrong or problematic there. So it all went smoothly. The property itself, all fairly straightforward, no major issues or anything else. It, as always does, took a little while to actually get all the sort of process in order and things to complete. But I think it was fairly standard, sort of 3 months. In fact, I think we managed a little under 3 months because the seller was trying to push things along as quickly as they could, really. So it all went smoothly. Purchase price of $312,000, 65% loan to value mortgage. So that worked out at about £205,000 of mortgage, because there were some fees and things that actually got added to the mortgage. So slightly higher than just the the pure calculation on that, pure percentage calculation on that, I should say. The money put into it, the investment, which came from savings in this case, it was about £125,000, and that included the deposit, stamp duty, and some other fees and normal sort of purchase expenses. And I've rounded slightly, but it's in that kind of area. Now, with only a 1.8% interest rate on the mortgage, that means that the interest that was going out was only just over £300 a month. So very, very low interest payments. And the rent, and this was for the existing tenancy, I didn't have to do anything to change this or increase this or anything else, was £1,350 a month. And that's obviously from day one, because they were tenants in situ. And in actual fact, because of the way it all worked out and things, there was a small amount, effectively sort of, it's not back rent, but where the tenants, because the tenants are paying monthly, obviously, they had already paid a month in advance, and then the completion of the purchase happened partway through that month. So there was a little bit of rent payment that sort of came with the actual completion of the purchase to cover the end of that, the tenant's month. So using some sort of fairly standard sort of assumptions and figures and things, that means this property was providing roughly a 9% return on investment from day one. Now, I think that defines it straight away as a pretty successful property investment. And it was so simple, so straightforward. There was nothing fancy about having to handle a property that had been housing multiple animals and was unpleasant to be in and needed a massive refurbishment, or I didn't convert it to an HMO from a single let or anything else like that. This was just tenants already there, straightforward purchase transaction, nothing fancy involved, no fancy finance, etc. And from day one, it's providing about 9% return on investment. Now, this was obviously a while ago, so I do actually have some figures from the first year, which I thought I would mention as well. And because the tenants were in situ and they were just on a rolling tenancy, I didn't change that at all, just maintained the existing tenancy they had and rolled that over. As it happens, a few months later, they did decide to leave. So I think they were there for 4, maybe 5 months after I purchased it. So as was part of the original plan, those tenants are leaving. Okay, that's the point at which I'm going to do a refurbishment on this property. And I say refurbishment, it was paint everything and replace some of the flooring, as in some of the carpets. That was pretty much it. There were a couple of other window latches that had gone, and the boiler needed some refurbishment and minor fixes, not actually replaced, but just fixed in place. So there were other bits and pieces, but really nothing all that major. And in total, I spent about £8,500 on the refurbishment process, and that includes some utility bills and some council tax and things like that during the couple of months or so that it was empty while I was doing this work. And the work did take a bit longer than I'd hoped, because I had trouble finding decorators in the right schedule or in the right window of time, and some other little bits of complications, but nothing major. And of course, there was some lost rent during that time as well. So that meant that the total income for the first 12 months, which included the first few months of the old tenancy, the gap while I was doing the redecoration, and then a new tenancy that started after that, the total first year income was only £10,800. That's a bit lower than would be expected from this property for a typical year, but that's what it was in the first 12 months. The expenses that I had, excluding the refurbishment, were for £4,100 roughly. So that's mortgage payments and a few other basic bits and pieces. There were a couple of little repairs that needed doing while tenants were there and things, rather than as part of the main redecoration. So that ends up being a first year profit on those sort of high level figures of £6,700. Now, I've excluded the redecoration costs in this because I was planning to do those from the beginning. So I've included those in my investment costs. So I'm going to tell you the return on investment in a moment. So I'm just saying that the return part was £6,700 and the investment part was made up of the deposit, stamp duty, fees, etc. And I'm putting in the refurbishment, redecoration costs into the investment side of this equation for this sort of scenario or this investment property. So with all that rolled together, it works out at a first year return on investment of about 5%. And it got better than that in subsequent years. But even at 5%, when Bank of England base rate was 0.25% and savings accounts were getting you basically nothing, 5% return on investment, pretty good. So I'm really very happy with that first year of this investment property, and it has continued to be a good investment property since then as well. So that really was, I think, a much simpler investment sort of story than the one last week. And I hope that you found that interesting, sort of compare and contrast with the story that Susanna told about her example investment property last week. And so either way, so long as it's a real example of a real investment property, whether it is more complicated and more involved and there are more steps to describe and talk about, and maybe things didn't go according to plan and you had to rethink things or whatever. But as long as we can share these experiences, these real experiences, then I think it can really help others learn what's involved in property investment. And there's so much sort of marketing hype out there around property investment. I really would like to be able to share more real examples on this podcast. And if you would also like to help other people and help other potential property investors learn what's really involved in property investment, and you're willing to join me for a relatively short conversation to share your own examples of real property investments, I would really, really like to hear from you. Please email me, show@thebusinessofproperty.com, and hopefully we can sort out bringing your experience onto the podcast to share with all the other listeners and help everyone learn together. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will look forward to talking to you again next time.